Got to connect to YouTube again. So connecting to YouTube again. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. Come back on.
Maybe.
Well, I can just ask Amy.
Many
No, you're
cameras.
good. You want to read? No, I was wondering if is there an easy way?
This is not working at all.
We were, as the residential water, residential water.
Well, you know that.
On top and
Well, I don't think you're waiting for this lovely noise to go away. No, what?
Didn't mess it up. Turned it off and won't come back on now.
He said something about it. Right. Well, we can talk about it out loud while it works. Wait.
I mean, just turn off the mics. Does that do anything?
Oh, Jeremy.
Jeremy's mic. Yeah, it's Jeremy.
Lee said it's a help if I go up there.
Oh, hold on. Yeah.
It will, but the problem is the whole system is down.
Just talk loud for a minute.
Jeremy just doesn't get a talk.
Okay, it's starting to come up.
Can't we do this with a simple agreement? I mean, not a complex build
Yeah.
agreement?
Okay, that's the PC's part of the problem, so.
I would do it even
Take that
without
off.
it. Looks like the mic's working, at least up here. You can do it with an agreement that's recorded against the property. I think you can do it without recording something against the property, as long as you're comfortable that after this building cycle, whatever happens according to zoning. And it could end up being a little bit more dense. But what you could do is make a zoning approval that's conditioned on building permits for these single family homes being pulled within a certain period of time. And if they're not pulled within that time, then it would revert back to the prior.
Could we actually just leave it at the low to moderate with changes then to the setback instead? Would that make it an easier one if we're allowing for
And I'll defer to Lance on that because I think he's got the better sense on how it's gonna jive with your general plan, with how the different zones interact. But as far as the mechanism, you can do a conditional zoning approval.
And then the difference between the RM and the RLM is 9,000 square foot minimum lot size versus 10,000. So there's 3 lots and they're all at 99, 98. I mean, they're close, but they're not quite there and it is very tight. So that's why they needed the RM instead of the RM. Or that's why they would prefer it.
that's all the questions I have.
So the mechanics of it, how it would work is you'll make the approval of a zoning change by ordinance and you would just write into the ordinance how long you want to give them to pull building permits. And then once that date is hit, if permits haven't been pulled, then it will revert back to its previous zone. So you may want to ask the applicant. Sense for what the building cycle is.
You think there's about 2 years?
I have 2 children that are ready to build right now. I have one that will probably go next year because she had a baby this year. But I would say within 3 years, they would definitely pull permits and build.
I'd be willing to think that goes far out as 5. I mean, I don't want to put a rush on them.
Should they turn their mics on? Yeah, I don't.
Lance, hope you got a good memory.
Okay.
I'll be living by there, so it's okay.
Can you guys just turn your mics off and see if that will help? Everybody's mics off.
And that condition is on all 12 lots, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I move to approve the ordinance 2025-05, changing zoning for the Stanford property approximately 6966 south, 725 east from agricultural to residential moderate with the condition of being 12 single-family lots. Going, and how do I say that, for the period of,
With the requirement that building.
with the requirement the building permits be pulled within the next 5 years.
Second,
If not, they reverts back to the previous.
still second.
Motion and a second, let's start.
For when?
Five
Claire?
years.
Within 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. The motion second from Councilman Windsor will begin with the roll call. Councilman Windsor.
Aye.
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 Who seconded that? Me?
Okay, thank you, motion carries. Next item, we need a motion to open public hearing to consider ordinance 2025-07 annexation and zoning designation.
What?
Second,
Second.
Hold on. wait.
Motion to open a public hearing.
Oh, motion open public hearing. Okay.
all in favor, say aye.
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 I didn't catch the second on that.
Okay, Jeremy.
Jeremy. But we're still on our question.
It says we are, but there's no visual.
Yeah.
Can they hear it? They should be able to hear it. Cameras aren't working.
Okay, do you have audio? We have a
We should have audio, yeah.
public hearing is open. Anyone have any comments? Please come forward.
Do the back to the access of ordinance 2025-07, the annexation, and it's listed as 2025-06.
Correct. It is 06.
Okay, so it's 2025-06. Is the public hearing. Anyone? Seeing none, we'll look for a motion to close the public
Motion
hearing.
to close.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ordinance 2025-06.
I wish you knew on all of them.
Where, who made those motions?
75 West South River Drive, which is about the city and designating the zone as residential.
I do have some questions. So the applicant is River or Nielsen Homes. But the zoning request is going to affect the property to the west as well.
Correct.
I mean, that. And I guess I'm gonna ask you this, so I get Riverwood wants that to be rezoned. Would we not want the ones that are going to remain agricultural currently to be agricultural, not zoned as RLM?
There would be an argument for that. There would be, you guys,
And I don't know,
the request was to go to the RLM zone.
but that was by Nielsen Homes.
Well, with the other people on
Okay.
the Peaks were aware of the application.
They're aware of
They're
the-
notified,
Okay.
they're involved in the process. Are they?
They didn't know there was a
intimately
they didn't know there was a
involved? Probably not.
rezone of their property. They knew there was an annexation of the property.
Correct.
Well, I would clarify the rezone idea that it's not zoned anything.
I get that, I get
It's
that.
A10 in the unincorporated county zone. And when it comes into the city, it needs to be designated a zone, and the zone that's proposed is the general plan zone of RL.
We're just doing it before it's being requested to be taken out of agricultural, is why I'm asking in those two pieces of property.
And that wouldn't change. It'd be a legal non-conforming use. They can keep operating. There's no reason that they would have to change zoning, but this way it's consistent with their general plan, which long-term, that property would go to RL.
Right, but we can't just go through and change things because that's what it's going to eventually be in the general plan. And that's the kind of the question that I had, was that if the people involved in it are involved and they're making the request and they're all on an application and signing it in, then I understand, yes, they're involved and they are the ones making the request to change the zone. And I know Wilson's Home is involved and it's going through that, but to me, when you're changing somebody's zone, I just like having all the names on it, the I's dotted and T's crossed.
If they were part of that request and their name's on that,
They are.
I mean, it's up to them to know what they requested, so it's. I know the annexation was a part of it. I just don't think they understood the zoning.
I don't know what they do. I have not,
He doesn't.
Okay.
I can't say what the Peaks know or don't know. The
That's the only-
application for annexation into South Weaver City with this zone included this whole entire property. The Peaks attended the county hearings. And so. And it's consistent with the general.
Larry, are you satisfied you did that? Make a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve ordinance -06. Multiple parcels of property South Weaver Drive, the boundaries of South Weaver City with designation of residential.
Motion on it. Motion carries. Item, resolution 25-07, approving an addendum to include recycling to yes.
Is that correct? Nice and easy.
Mayor, I move to approve resolution 2507, approving the addendum to include recycling for the Robinson Waste contract.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second, roll call from.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Get those cans rolled out. Next item, resolution 25-08, awarding 13 water and sewer. This one on there.
Well, actually, we can all look at into it and all the paperwork showing how much.
Water and sewer project to tackle rock excavation.
Second.
Roll call, vote, starting with Councilman Winter.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Switching items. Okay, So, as in the staff report, you can see that we've done a lot of work in staff, complementary, and with the committee especially in preparing this budget. I put the numbers together for you. This page right here is a summary of all the funds listed on one page. So you can see the revenues and expenditures. At this point, I do have all of the supplemental requests that were recommended by the committees in this budget to this point. There were supplemental requests that wanted further discussions, and then the ones that did not make the list for this fiscal year at this point. Within those committees, they suggested to go with these recommendations. Before we dive into it too far, I did want to note that just below this summary, I have on page 6 of this staff report, I do have a correction to the RAP tax and ARPA fund analysis. The Peterson Family Memorial Bench
Which one?
is actually ARPA funds, not RAP tax. So just switch that $1,100 over to ARPA funds rather than RAP. And I wanted to provide this analysis to you guys so you can see where we are with ARPA funds at this point and RAP tax. I do have an estimated revenue amount for RAP tax. So that kind of gives us where we're at this point and what we expect at the end of the year. Are there any questions on ARPA and RAP tax at this point?
Yeah, why did we switch that bench over to ARPA instead of RAP?
That was, I wasn't here.
It was originally identified as ARPA and it was just calculated on this sheet as the RAP tax, but it actually was ARPA spend.
Going back to that summary page really quick, I did want to show that I tried to put in contributions to and from different funds off to the side and a little bit of an explanation to kind of help you see that within the funds, we are transferring back and forth to help out other funds. Now going into, we'll look at the supplemental request. Kind of highlighted these based on.
What page numbers?
Page 105.
105, sorry.
Come on.
Starting off with the FAC security cameras, we're doing this fiscal year. So that's not going to be a supplemental request for next year. But those in green are those that are recommended by the committees to be approved. These are the items that I do have built into the current budget at this point. The blue items are ones that the committees felt like they wanted to have further discussions on, whether they should be approved or not. And then those in red are those items or supplemental requests that the committees did not recommend to either have discussion or did not want to be part of this current budget. Are there items that you have questions on in relation to the supplemental budget?
Just one question, on the fire station remodel, we asked to split that out into phases, and I don't see that here. Do we have any estimates on those various phases that we talked about?
I don't have estimates on those at this point. I'll make note of that to do that for the next.
Yeah, I think that's the only one that I'd like to see split out, and then we can make a more informed decision on how to move forward. I think we all agree that something needs to be done there, but if we can phase that and then see what that costs, so for a phased approach, I think that would be a nice approach.
Okay. I will work with the fire chief and what those phases look like.
Yeah, perfect.
Any other questions on the blue? That really the blue is for the committees wanted to bring to the council and have discussions on those.
I'll talk to the side by side. I know that we have kind of a split council decision on that one. I don't think that one's gonna make it in to this one, but I think the idea that we had about looking for sponsors for at least a portion of that cost is the path we need to take on that particular expense. Unless my fellow,
I would support any way of finding it paid for, whether it's a sponsorship, a grant. I mean, I would consider it. Otherwise, I would say it's off the list.
yeah, I think that's wise as well. So I would like us to put that on our radar from a safety committee perspective to see about how we can go about exploring. I think after we get the decision from the grant back and what that looks like, then going forward with, if we don't get that full cost covered by a grant, then can we get some sort of sponsorship to move for that cost to at least partially covered, and then if we can get some good movement there to Blair's point, bring it back to the council to see if there's something much lower cost that's more digestible.
Yeah, I know Derek was working on the grant side of it. I'm not sure where he's at on that.
My understanding was that it was submitted and we're just waiting to hear back, was my understanding from the last meeting. And
Would anybody feel comfortable breaking that up into 2 budget cycles and dividing that? Doing 25 this year and 25 next year? Or would we have to have a match if we are approved for the grant?
for me, I think I am fairly confident that we can find a way to do that without using city funds. So I would like to explore that before we try to break that up. And then if I'm completely off, if there's no way anyone's willing to pitch in to help it, or the grant falls through, or all of the above, then I think we can bring it back into the discussion here, if we have that leftover funds or something somewhere. That folks thought of this on things to.
And I agree with you on the fire station remodel. I mean, I've talked with several of you about the mayor today, just trying to figure out how that could be phased. But I think it's needed. I'd rather do that and try to do that for the fire station than the second. And maybe Angie, you can remind me, and maybe Dave, I know we discussed the hazard mitigation, that there's grant money, or is that gone now?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. I was gonna bring that up as well. Received information, an email from the state emergency manager just within the last 48 hours that basically said federal funding for that grant program is completely turned off right now. And so even if we wanted to, the grant for that project isn't available, and it was basically a grant funded project. So staff's recommendation is to just hold off on that one and see if funding becomes available. If not, then we'll have to look at other things, but that project's on hold because there's no funding for it.
Can I just ask a quick question on that one? Is this one of those things where we're kicking it down the road and then it's gonna bite us in the butt eventually? Like, Or is this not that serious? Okay. I'm good. with it. Thank you.
We were contemplating on whether to even do it or not, as far as the mitigation plan. Because we can also use the county. Correct.
I'll give you the 15-second broader overview of this project, and that is we identified through this multi-hazard mitigation plan creation process 5 different projects that the city could do to make our infrastructure more resilient in case of a natural disaster. Specifically, our water tanks and our city hall facility and our public works facility. Those were the ones that came to the highest priority. If something were to happen in those facilities, we potentially could, look at severe consequences. So what do we need to do to make those facilities more resilient? The first 2 projects were, let's do a study on the water tank to see what would be needed to make it more resilient. It's kind of a broad unknown. This one is the east tank. Staff's feeling, and I think many's feeling, is the west tank is probably more vulnerable than the east tank is at this point. And so even if we were moving forward on a grant funding project, we may want to study a different facility than that one. However, not having the grant money, I think, gives us an opportunity to look at that plan. It's essentially a 5-year multi-hazard mitigation plan, identifies these projects. In a few years, we'd be looking at that plan anyway to update it. Prior, there was grant funding available for that process of updating as well. That whole kind of resiliency program is turned off of funding. I said 15, did you hear 15? I thought 50.
So the last one on there, we have the scheduled code enforcement officer. Does anybody think that needs to be on there? Besides Lance?
The committee's conversation about code enforcement officer was staff has done some things in the last few months to enhance that with our current situation and setup. And we'd like to request at least this next year to see if those internal operational changes can take effect and prove beneficial before needing to put additional resource into the program.
Great. Thank you, David.
I would recommend with that, though, you also look for an automated approach. I know Pyramid and a few other cities that are down there that are completely automated. They don't even get to see, as soon as the complaint is registered, it's automatically filed, it automatically goes to the homeowners and people around it. And the timer is set so that the further letters go out at the appropriate time, and it's not until all of them have triggered that then it finally pops up for somebody to have to look at, and that's usually at the time just before litigation. So there's a lot of simpler ways of
Usually my self, not self.
so most of
Logic complaint, that complaint is automated.
right.
There's some checks and balances on what you get complaints for.
Well, so like if a neighbor is putting in a complaint for somebody's, all it does is then send them out a letter that we've already agreed, and this is what we want. It just says, you have been reported for this. Here's how this is what city code says to do, and the time to take care of each one of those things. In 30 days, another letter is sent out asking for it to make sure that it has been done and that the sign off is taking place in city hall, saying that this is what taken care of. So it really, when I say automated, it really just makes it so the onus is on the individuals who are cleaning up the situation and mitigating it.
So
It's not sending AI after it.
it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't mitigate what you were after, which is it doesn't mitigate frivolous or bogus complaints.
Right.
You said that was Carolyn City? I'm gonna have to do some research on systems and processes like
Yeah, we'll
that.
ask them next week.
And we'll ask them next week. Yes. I know exactly. Who will send me to somebody else. Okay, Brett?
Okay, those in green were recommended by the committees. Do you have any questions for the committee members or as a council on approving those items in the budget?
This is about the yellow one. The dollar amount on this one is different than the other slide you showed us, so the 32,000 is updated amount.
Correct, the 32,000 is the updated.
And the FAC HVAC is, there's no participation from the school district for that replacement, correct?
There's a split between the city and the school district. But this is setting our portion of that.
This is just building up to whatever.
It's building up to what it is. It's going to be more than $10,000. But this is a portion that we're building up so that when that time comes, we have a little buffer there to help us pay for that.
Thank you.
Just to recap on the blue, as I understand the conversation, 2, 7, and 15. And more information on it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Let me. Looking at, going back to the staff report, I have some budget highlights there. And then one page up. It's 100. These are some of the things that, as we talked throughout the different meetings that we've had, committees, where we want to be as a city as a whole. So here is just a few of the budget highlight items. I don't have any details on the tax rate this year yet. They're saying first part of May may have some numbers. So at this point, we're just holding the tax rate. Sales tax, that's it. We have increased the estimate for sales tax a little bit, including a portion of that coming from general RV, not the whole amount that we have as an increase, but just a portion of that.
You're being very conservative with your estimates with general RV, just until we see what actually goes through.
Yes.
I would add a little bit has started to come, and so it's not just a shot in the dark, it's based on what we are starting to see. But it is still very conservative.
As known, the gravel pit revenues are going to be reduced from the SB 75 portion and the portion that goes to the rec fund. Those are decreased over time, where we've done our best to look at what those estimates are. We do expect that to happen. Wildland revenues and related expenses have been removed from the budget. That's not part of the discussion at this point. Utilities, specifically Rocky Mountain Power estimates, I think they estimate about an 18% increase. I don't know the impacts that would have for the city, if that's for residential and non-residential. I don't know off the top of my head, but I haven't really built for the buffer for that. This is an election year, so we have that increase in the budget. The contract for the sheriff's office, we actually had discussions with them recently, and they're going to provide the same service they did last year. There is just an annual increase of their cost that is passed on to us.
Yeah, that amount hasn't changed since it was first presented to us, correct? Or has it been changed?
We estimated an amount early in the budget process, and the mayor, Brett, myself was able to meet with the sheriff's office and the city, the county's controller and talk through their numbers. There is an increase just kind of based on COLA for them, some cost adjustments, but it's not a level of service change, and it did fit within our estimate. It was almost right on that.
It was very, very close. It was just a 3% increase. We do have COLA and merit benefit increases that are built into the budget. And then this year, in fiscal year 26, we plan on sharing the payment of the bond throughout the other funds. And I have that within those funds. I've created a specific expense line for that. If you have any questions on that, we can talk about it. I was going to provide the detail of that breakout, and I just based it off when I was preparing these documents. So I apologize, and I can get that to you. I can provide that next time we meet for a work session.
How about just on a high level, because I noticed that we have 3 departments that are taking, have cash taken out of it for their portion of it. How is that chosen? Which one will have the amounts taken out each one of the years? And how is the percentage that is coming out of it?
So a lot of these percentages were designed before I came here, but I do have the numbers. It's broken out. I guess how much detail do you want to have?
Just to understand the logic. I mean, I'm not really trying to question it. So, for example, Parks got a pretty huge chunk of it taken out, and I don't know if that's going to be this year only or every year. While what was it? I think support or streets or one of them got a very small portion of it. I can't remember which one. So I'm just looking for a high level.
Yeah, Mac initially did the analysis and that breakdown of which department, and it was essentially based on how much of the building would be used by each of the departments or the funds. Those are simply our calculations. There's not any bond requirements to pay it based on that. We have calculated out a percentage of the total payment over the full bond, and even some of the additional project costs, like the cost of the land and things like that, so that there's this total amount that we divided up over all of the different funds. That can be looked at pretty much year by year, and some years maybe one fund might take a bigger portion or a smaller portion, but we do have that essentially evaluated based on the use of the building by the fund.
Well, with that answer, then, is there something that you can send me later on that I can look through? Specifically looking at Parks, and like I said, there's a large chunk that would be permanently coming out of, or semi-permanently coming out of the Parks Department. So that's what I'm trying to understand. How much and for how long.
Yeah, we can absolutely send you that breakdown.
Okay.
Yeah, fund obligation.
I have that, and I can send it out, and I can provide it along with my packet next work session as well, if you want.
Okay.
The last thing that I have on the budget highlight is the implementation of the recycling program. I did look at how many utility accounts we have currently, and did the math going backwards and figured out what that increase would be, and I show that in the sanitation fund.
The one question on the supplemental requests on the summary page, you have the FSU, HB, and CS one at a time. That should be an ongoing, but it does have a cap next to it.
That is true. I'll adjust that. So it's a one-time
For this year.
for this year.
But it's also going to be there next year.
It's also going to be there next year, and who knows for how long until we actually need to use that. At this point, we don't have a cap, we don't have a,
It's gonna be a large dollar, it's gonna.
yeah. It's gonna take a
At
while.
$10,000 a year, we won't even get to our half. A long time.
Recommend we raise that or?
Well, but I think it should be raised personally, because I've been through that. And I have an idea of what that is going to take. But I don't know that the rec can afford that. I do think when that happens, that it's gonna be a broader city discussion.
I think that's one of those expense items that if we find ourselves with a little extra unallocated revenue, then I think talk to those where it's.
I would agree.
I can definitely do that, and I thought personally that the $10,000 was a low number, but I think at the same time, it brought up the fact that we need to do something.
I just want to acknowledge Curtis being proactive on that and bringing that up, and he pushed that essentially saying, we need to think about it and set it aside, so he was thinking long-term there, and I think that's good on him.
Moving on to the detail of the budget draft, exhibit 2, I can't remember what page that starts on. 106 is where it starts. Going through that first page, that's the revenues, the expected for the general fund. And I tried to provide some explanation off to the side so that you guys can kind of understand why we're expecting those numbers. As I mentioned, we tried to be conservative with the interest income. Would like to see an analysis on that, see changes. I can do that. It appears that a lot of the interest income has kind of been the same for several years. If we need to look at how we're budgeting that, we can definitely look into it. As I mentioned, we're going to hold the tax rate, so those are just estimate numbers at this point. Until I get those final numbers or estimates from the county, that's kind of where we're at. Are there any questions on the revenues portion that you have questions on? Any portions of that? I tried to hit the highlights, but then there's also a lot of details. So I didn't want to go too much into the detail unless you have questions.
I do know we went over all of the revenues of the committees as well and went line by line, so a lot of work has been done on this already. Would you like to go department by department or just broad questions at this point? Or
I
topics?
think if anybody has questions.
Just for a little bit of clarification, if you could go down to administrative. Looking at administrative, full-time employees, we've got an increase of 21,000 or 4%.
What page are you on?
Administrative is on 112. Yeah, there you can see dollar amount 21,000 for Colin Merritt for our increases for our full-time employees. I noticed that part-time employee wages is 0. Is there a reason for that? Was that an oversight or have part-time?
The 0 is the change from fiscal year 25 to the current.
Right, so that would mean that we're not giving them increases.
At this point, the part-time has, where the part-time, they get paid out of there, there's kind of a two-part to that. Is that they're with the 3% is still within that budget amount. So it didn't really change
It's
a
just a
whole
change.
lot.
So I asked this question earlier before council, just, and I think the numbers that Brett's given us are more actual numbers of the change in the percentage. But with the change of employees and people going back and forth, the overall discussion for merit and COLA is 3%, 2 and 1 is what's gone across citywide. But that number doesn't really reflect in these numbers over here percentage wise. It's totally, because again, Dave can maybe answer that better, but I have the same.
So that makes sense.
I have, because all those numbers as you go through this are all different.
Yeah.
But that's not where we're actually.
Yeah, so basically we're saying that the amount that we pay, because we either have less or we are paying them less, will still be curtailed underneath the regular 22,000.
The philosophy is a standardized percentage across the board for merit and COLA. However, there are individual circumstances by department where we may have had an employee leave and there was turnover and the new employee's wage is lower than the previous. So still factoring in a merit COLA, it's not a 3%, it's lower than that. Or, other circumstances. We do have some employees that we are recognizing completing education, significant education this upcoming fiscal year. And so we wanted to identify an amount for that. And so you may see in certain areas that it's not 3 across the board, and that's the explanation.
Also, I'm just flabbergasted that we're spending that much on city hall control. But the other question.
We haven't had a mouse upstairs for a week.
We have down as 20 thou, and 21, it was a little bit higher, it was like $25,000. So for the election year, is that what we're being charged by Davis County, or is this taking into account municipal as well participating? Because my understanding is just 100%. We just write them a check if they run it. Also.
Yes, that's correct. It's traditionally been about $10,000 an election. So if we have a primary and a general election, then that's the $20,000 budget.
Okay. So the 25.
So we haven't received anything from them yet.
That's an estimate. They haven't given us a dollar figure exact at this point in the budget process.
Okay.
Are you just afraid that we're underestimating that cost?
I was kind of worried about it because we've already seen that it was higher on it, so that was it. I'd never known the county to cut a break of $5,000. So I was wondering if there was something exceptional that happened in the previous one, or if they have lowered it. So it doesn't sound like it's just an estimate.
I don't remember that election year specifically being weird, but I don't also remember feeling like it was somehow out of, there was nothing that triggers in my mind saying we need to budget differently than we normally do. I mean, that was just the cost that year. So
Okay.
I thought they came out with something in the past couple of years that just said about each cycle. Am I totally up the night? I digress.
Which one was you saying yes to?
I just know what she's saying right now.
yeah, this is the first full draft budget, and we're in April, and by June there could be adjustments as we get more and more information, whether that's revenue projections or on expenses specific like that. So you bring up a good example.
Page 120, community services. Specifically, professional and tech subdivision reviews. That's taking a $20,000 increase. Now, I know that's part of the pass-through, so I'm not sure why it's on here, but I do like seeing, that it's going to be an increase. Now, is that increase in the cost? So it's not a projection of, hey, we're going to be building a lot more and doing a lot more reviews. It's the cost of having these reviews that is going up.
It is an increase in the number of reviews. That's the projection, and it is tied to a revenue line item as well that also has a $20,000 increase. And if we get more revenue if we get more subdivision fees and more reviews, we would also get a revenue that associates with it. When you say it's passed through, that's the process. So these,
Okay, so. Yeah, please. So the fee schedule that goes with these reviews, is that standard for a time period or does it change year to year? So like a 3-year fee schedule is fixed or do we look at the fee schedule every year?
we do look at the fee schedule every year.
Okay,
Yeah,
but you're telling us this year the fees aren't going up, just the number of.
Just the
fees.
number.
exactly.
Thank you.
I will, this is a little bit of a separate answer, but as an awareness item, staff is looking at the way and the methodology that we do review fees. And we are looking at potentially bringing forward a change to that, but not because we're looking to increase fees, but just kind of change the philosophy of fees. Many of our developers feel a little bit of a nickel and dime process because every time staff's time is involved, this pass-through fee is involved, we're sending them an invoice. And we are trying to evaluate whether or not we could do kind of a one-time lump fee at the beginning that would cover a certain number of time or action or whatnot, so that they don't feel like they're getting billed every single time we're out. So we are looking at that, but right now this is simply number of actions, not the price of action.
And that was, I read into it, what my question was, is why are we, those fees at a different level, whether it's a different fee, they have charged them or whatnot, so it's good to know that more. So, then on streets. Okay, so on streets, we do have the public works bond payment shared for $18,000. Yes, 18 grand. Looking at this in streets, how is that going to impact? How's that going to impact some of the programs that we have going on the streets? Or is this just now more bookkeeping, or this is where we're saying it's coming from? Because I would assume that the streets department would be taking a lot more than the parks department would be in space for the public works business. On that?
We have technically 2 streets employees.
Yeah.
We have 4 parks employees, and the vehicles and trailers and equipment and stuff for the parks.
I think if I remember right, I divided this up by FTEs and looking at the size of the funds. And that's how that percentage came about. But I'm sure you'll come up with whatever you gave us but that's fine. This only has 2 FTEs or there's two trucks.
And then,
Again, those percentages are not set in stone, and if we
Yeah, we can
to
change
adjust
that
that,
however.
we can pay that bond however, and with whatever revenue we want to pay.
yeah, and I get that. It's just when I see under the parks department.
There's a button on.
There is
There is a volume. Yeah, because I just wanted to point out on here that parks for that, it's 113,000. So I guess as long as this is just coming out of general fund, we're just saying, okay, well, we're allocating this much out of each one of the departments. But if we're saying we're gonna take 113,000 out of the parks department, that's a pretty decent hit to their budget and what they're gonna be able to do at all. So that's why I guess I just want to be able to understand that part better. Yeah, that is.
That's the good thing about how we have it set up. We can evaluate every year and adjust it if needed, look at it and figure out, is that really how much we should be taking out of parks? Should we be taking more out of somewhere else? We can evaluate it, as regularly as you want.
I agree, though.
Yep.
I only have one comment, and that was based on seeing the increase in Rocky Mountain Power, which was fairly significant throughout the whole budget, so I was surprised at, which might possibly encourage us even more than the 50,000 in streetlight replacement again, which we've done. 50,000 hardly gets us any streetlights. If we can find the money, I mean, we are a negative, you know, but that's partly because of the 100,000 at streetlights that we did last year versus 50. But we're 81 less than we budgeted last year. I just wondered if that is something, if we could find the extra money, let's start pushing those through more. Wayne would agree. I know it's, that was it. That was his baby. So
What's the savings for light? Column, and just everything down there. But I think it's one light, if you replace one light, it's the savings of one power of one. The cost of the power before the change.
yeah,
Something along those lines, I think it could be on that as well.
the problem was.
I'm always two lights to the left.
The problem was is that like 50,000 years, it takes like 10 years to replace them all,
Yeah.
but yet,
Or 15.
and we may not be able to find those lights.
Well, 50,000 was just something to get something started.
No, I don't disagree, because we had no money, and it was a stretch to even get the
But
50.
if they're jacking the price up, it's like, you know, that much increase, it's like, that's probably one of our biggest power drains. So we would actually have, like, help, once we find those additional sales tax revenue or interest income or whatever it might be, the council would get an opportunity to see, hey, we can buy 6 more lights this year, you know, fall, period of time.
And I said, if we find that sales tax or property taxes, we get closer to June, and we can put that money there, I would like to see that.
It is competing for a Western Drive project, but I do agree.
I get that, yeah,
Well, we get new lights on Western Drive, so it's kind of like, I'll give you,
there you go.
quit laughing at that.
I'm only laughing at myself.
We did re-budget some from the fiscal year 24 to this year for the streetlights, but it wasn't, I guess for my end, it wasn't brought up as a project that going forward that we necessarily wanted to keep at re-budgeting those amounts, but we can look at that and add in if we have expect extra sales tax or whatever. we can do that.
It's just something as a municipal utilities committee, we had not even discussed, really. So that's why I was bringing it up.
You can blame that on the miniature.
That's probably the committee chair's problem. Good job, man.
Is there any other items that stuck out to any of you?
Thanks for the time and effort this staff's put forward.
Well, I've had a lot of committee members and staff members helping put this together.
Just take the compliment.
I'll take it. I didn't do anything, but.
I'm just saying I didn't do it all by myself, so.
Good job.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Any other reports? Any business? Any other new business? Do you have any new business for me? No. Any reports? Start with committee report.
Well, yeah, we had the finance management committee start today, and we reviewed the else we can't say. Going out with P-tip and going into the rest of the positive. We did ask staff to have our. That fell in previous quarter. Kind of give us idea. Outside of that, we could talk about the reserves policy. Reading that back up. 6 months. Outside of that, we've not met, gravel pit's not met. In the first quarter, so, calendar.
Scheduled Monday.
Well, I can't report on it because we'll be meeting on Monday. So, I'll be there to the chairs.
Yeah, thank you. Jeremy?
No new updates for mine.
No? Nothing new this time. Angie?
Just a reminder about the Easter egg hunt, 6 PM sharp, April 19th at Cherry Farm Park.
Wait, it's changed.
Hold up.
Central.
I think it's 18th.
We have 3 parks that start with a C, 4.
Where's it at?
Central.
Central.
Central Park.
It's my report, I don't know.
Friday, the 18th.
We're having an Easter egg
Sharp,
hunt
Central Park.
sometime next week.
Shaylee could report on that.
That's all I have. It's nothing, I'm sorry.
Shady, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the end of Easter egg hunt is next Friday, the 18th, 6 PM sharp, nailed it. We've had about 720 people respond on Facebook already, so we've got a lot.
How many?
How many?
720,
700. Okay.
yeah. So, I mean, we can get that or we can't. It's
Yeah.
toss up, but, another thing that I have to say, I guess.
Before you leave the Easter egg hunt, Shaylee has been dividing out the Easter eggs to the age groups. And individually has to count 13,000 eggs. And we'll be stuffing those over the next 10 days with help and assistance, but she's got a big task and she's doing a good job.
So if I cry, don't pay attention to it. Besides that, I know we're not still not done with everyone, but we have spring cleanup this Saturday from 8 until 2 at Canyon Meadows. And that's green waste only, so don't bring plastic bags or anything like that, just bring. Still have dumpsters there until 2 p.m.
So it's from 8 to what?
8 AM to 2 PM.
At what, and we're at?
Canyon Meadows.
And is that on the website? Because I've had some people ask me. Okay.
Hey Shane, how many people do we have at the Easter egg hunt last year?
Over 1,000. Hence the jump up from like 4,000 eggs to 13,000. I want it to last longer than 30 seconds. No, sorry, 5 seconds. So hopefully this does it.
Blair.
I don't have anything to add other than remind everybody your water gets turned on. So make sure your water valves are off.
Shaylee's calling me.
Shaylee, thank you for putting that out. You're very good.
Okay, if nothing else, we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I just wanted to remind you that the meeting scheduled in April, the next meeting, we're having the work session at 5 PM. And then in May, we're meeting on the 13th and the 20th, not the 13th and the 27th, because of that switch when we made the calendar. So 13th and 20th in May.